On 5th April 2016, in her light-filled East Side apartment in New York City, the 92-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt sits at a small writing table, smoothing the edge of a pale blue note card before she signs her name. Outside, the city hums. Inside, the lamps are low, the silk of her blouse catching a soft yellow sheen. Beside her lies the finished manuscript of The Rainbow Comes and Goes, an epistolary conversation with her son, Anderson Cooper, letters about life, love, and loss that will be published that day. She pauses over one familiar line: "Death is the price you paid for being born." It reads like philosophy, but it is also accounting, a quiet reckoning with a life that began in a Gilded Age nursery and passed through courtrooms, studios, boardrooms, and a 14th floor balcony. The pen moves, elegant and steady. The gesture is refined, almost ceremonial. Yet, under the practiced curve of her signature, lies an unspoken question: how much of this grace was chosen, and how much was paid for? By the time cameras record her death on 17th June 2019, Gloria Laura Vanderbilt has been called many things: poor little rich girl, genes pioneer, society beauty, artist, survivor. Born on 20th of February 1924 into the great Vanderbilt fortune, she was first placed on public display at 9 during the 1934 custody battle that tabloids named the trial of the century. Half a century later, another, quieter trial would expose how advisors had drained her finances, forcing the heiress who once fronted a $70 million a year jeans empire to sell the Southampton and Manhattan houses that had defined her world. Between those two tribunals lay the education of an American heiress, Swiss governesses replaced by New York psychotherapists, finishing school manners by television interviews, calling cards by a signature stitched across millions of back pockets. Through it all, she kept writing thank you notes, love letters, memoirs, legal affidavits, trying to inscribe a self that was more than a headline. This is the story of the woman who lost everything twice, and what she understood about the cost of belonging to a famous name. On a chilly morning in October 1934, in a New York County courtroom on Center Street, 9-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt sits very straight on the witness chair, her shoes just touching the brass footrail. The case? In the matter of Vanderbilt, the custody dispute between her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, and her aunt, the sculptor Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, is front-page news from London to Los Angeles. Newsreel cameras whir. Reporters scratch notes as the judge listens to testimony about nurses, nannies, and the moral dangers of European society. The courtroom itself, located in the New York Supreme Court building, represents the architecture of authority: high ceilings with ornate molding, mahogany benches polished by decades of litigation, windows that filter autumn light into dusty shafts across the proceedings. The room fills daily with spectators, mostly women, who arrive early to claim seats. Guards struggle to maintain order as crowds press against the doors, drawn by the spectacle of wealth exposing its private dysfunction. The trial itself unfolds across weeks, with testimony filling thousands of pages of court transcripts. Witnesses describe young Gloria's life shuttling between her mother's Parisian circles and her aunt's Long Island estate, each side painting the other as morally unfit. Nurses testify about Gloria Morgan's late-night parties and relationships with married men. The defense counters with allegations about Gertrude's bohemian artist friends and unconventional lifestyle. Throughout it all, the child herself remains largely silent, called as evidence, but rarely as witness. Maria Caillot, known as Dodo, Gloria's French nurse, provides particularly damaging testimony against Gloria Morgan. She describes the mother's neglect, her preference for European social life over child rearing, her alleged affair with a German prince. The testimony, delivered in accented English and requiring translation at points, introduces sensational details about titled lovers, late-night revels, and a mother who allegedly expressed indifference to her daughter's well-being. Whether accurate or exaggerated, the testimony shapes public perception and judicial opinion. The defense strategy emphasizes Gertrude's stability. wealth, and American values against Gloria Morgan's European decadence and financial dependence. Lawyers note that Gertrude, despite her artistic career and unconventional personal life, maintains proper households, supports American institutions, and demonstrates maternal concern despite not being the biological mother. The implicit message resonates in Depression-era America: European aristocratic pretensions versus solid American achievement. In later memoirs, Gloria will recall simply, "I was the prize." In the trial transcripts and society columns, she appears as the child, an object around whom fortunes and reputations pivot. The rustle of her dress, the soft click of the courtroom door closing are not recorded, but the verdict is custody to Gertrude, limited visitation to her mother. The judge's ruling emphasizes the superior moral environment at Old Westbury and Gertrude's financial stability. But the subtext is clear. In custody battles among the wealthy, respectability matters more than maternal bond. The visitation restrictions prove particularly painful. Gloria Morgan is limited to weekends and holidays, supervised visits that prevent the spontaneous intimacy of normal mother-child relationships. Letters between mother and daughter, some preserved in archives, reveal the strain. Formal, carefully worded communications that express affection while acknowledging legal boundaries. The child learns early that love itself can be subject to judicial decree. The press coverage shapes public perception for decades. Photographs of the small, dark-haired girl leaving the courthouse appear in newspapers nationwide, often accompanied by estimates of her wealth and speculation about her future. Headlines refer to her inheritance, reportedly $4 million held in trust, generating substantial annual income, and speculate about her future. The trial establishes a template: Gloria Vanderbilt as public property, her private life subject to commentary, her choices measured against impossible standards. Tabloid coverage introduces a new phenomenon: celebrity childhood, where famous offspring become products for public consumption. Newsreels show Gloria arriving and departing from court, her face anxious but composed, already learning the mask of public appearance. Radio commentators discuss the case between advertisements, turning family trauma into entertainment. The trial becomes early reality programming, decades before the term exists. The first lesson is clear. In this family, identity is something argued over in public. As the headlines fade, the real education of the heiress begins in a house built to display another generation's power. By early 1935, Gloria was installed at Old Westbury, her Aunt Gertrude's vast Long Island estate, a late echo of the Gilded Age. Long allées, marble staircases, a studio filled with sculpture and cigarette smoke. Estate records and letters show Gertrude training the girl's eye to art, to composition, to how rooms tell stories. Biographers note Gloria's memory of being startled to see her aunt in trousers, an early breach in the rigid codes she'd been taught. Old Westbury itself represents a particular vision of American aristocracy. Built in the early 20th century when the Whitneys and Vanderbilts sought to recreate English country house culture on Long Island's Gold Coast, the estate spans hundreds of acres with formal gardens designed by landscape architects, stables housing prize thoroughbreds, and a main house filled with European art and antiques. Gertrude, an established sculptor who had studied at the Art Students League and in Paris, maintains a separate studio on the grounds where she creates monumental works for public spaces. The estate operates as a small kingdom with its own hierarchies and rhythms. Gardeners tend the formal parterres and rose gardens, their work synchronized with seasonal displays. Grooms exercise horses along bridle paths that wind through wooded areas. The house staff, butler, housekeeper, cook, parlor maids, ladies' maids, perform choreographed routines that keep the establishment running invisibly. Gloria observes this machinery, learning how privilege operates through the coordinated labor of others. The daily rituals are less radical than Gertrude's personal style, but no less instructive. Like other upper-class girls of the interwar years, Gloria is tutored in French and piano, expected to send handwritten thank-you notes on engraved stationery and to present calling cards correctly, customs codified in etiquette books from Emily Post, and echoed in finishing school curricula. At a small desk in a high-ceilinged bedroom, the child leans over thick cream paper, practicing the looping G of her first name. Writing is a lesson in posture as much as expression. Governesses oversee her education, following a curriculum that balances academic subjects with social graces. Morning lessons include French conversation with a native speaker, arithmetic and geography from approved textbooks, and history focused on European and American civilization. The emphasis falls on breadth rather than depth. A young lady should know enough to converse intelligently, but not so much as to appear pedantic or unfeminine. Afternoons bring instruction in watercolor painting, piano practice with a professional musician, and deportment training that emphasizes graceful movement, proper posture, and the complex choreography of social calls. The piano lessons, conducted in a music room with tall windows overlooking the gardens, follow rigorous European methods. The instructor, a Prussian woman who trained at a conservatory, demands precise finger placement, disciplined practice, and emotional restraint in interpretation. Gloria later recalls these sessions as exercises in endurance. Hours at the keyboard, hands cramping, the metronome's relentless tick measuring time. The goal is competence sufficient for drawing room performance, not professional ambition. The household operates according to seasonal rhythms documented in estate records and family correspondence. Winters at Old Westbury involve a quiet routine, lessons, meals in the formal dining room, occasional visits from approved guests. Summers include garden parties where Gloria observes her aunt entertaining artists, patrons, and society figures, learning through observation the subtle dynamics of conversation, introduction, and social navigation. The estate's library, filled with art books and novels, becomes a refuge where she develops her visual sensibility. Gertrude's influence proves more complex than simple guardianship. A successful artist who had studied abroad, created major public sculptures, and maintained independence despite wealth and social position, she models possibilities that contradict Gloria's earlier training. Yet Gertrude also embodies her generation's contradictions, unconventional in personal life, but conventional in many social attitudes, supportive of women's artistic ambitions, but skeptical of broader feminist politics, wealthy but sometimes indifferent to the privilege that wealth confers. The studio visits prove most memorable. Gloria recalls watching her aunt work on large clay sculptures. The smell of wet earth mixing with cigarette smoke, the physical labor of moving and shaping material. Gertrude explains composition, proportion, the importance of negative space, lessons that will inform Gloria's later painting and collage work. These moments offer glimpses of art as vocation rather than accomplishment, work rather than leisure. Grace, she learns, is something you copy until the lines become your own. Yet the polished rituals of Old Westbury cannot silence the letters arriving from abroad, or the sense that she belongs to two incompatible worlds. In 1936 and 1937, passenger manifests and passport records place young Gloria shuttling between Europe and America, summers on the Riviera with her mother, winters under her aunt's supervision. The society press follows each movement, using phrases like the world's richest little girl, a label that collapses her into a symbol of fading Gilded Age abundance amid Depression-era hardship. The European summers introduce different lessons. Gloria Morgan's circle includes titled Europeans, Expatriate Americans, and the international set that congregates at Cannes, Monte Carlo, and Biarritz. Here, the rituals differ from Old Westbury's structured routine. Late breakfasts on sun-drenched terraces, beach clubs where tan bodies replace the pallor valued in earlier generations, casino evenings that extend past midnight. Gloria observes her mother's performance of continental sophistication, fluent French, fashionable dress, the ability to navigate multiple social registers. Yet letters and later memoirs suggest the child also perceives the precariousness beneath the glamour. Her mother's dependence on her trust fund, the constant negotiations over access and money, the awareness that their lifestyle exists at Gertrude's sufferance, the Riviera itself, in the late 1930s, represents the last gasp of interwar cosmopolitan culture. Hotels along the Promenade des Anglais host exiled aristocrats, successful artists, wealthy Americans seeking European sophistication, and adventurers of various descriptions. The season runs from spring through early autumn, with specific beaches, restaurants, and nightclubs serving as gathering points for the international elite. Gloria Morgan navigates this world with practiced ease, her beauty and title, opening doors that money alone might not. The contrast with Old Westbury proves instructive. Where Gertrude's household emphasizes routine, discipline, and purposeful activity, Gloria Morgan's world celebrates spontaneity, pleasure, and display. Where Old Westbury gardens are meticulously planned, the Riviera coastline appears wild and sun-bleached. Where Gertrude's friends discuss art and politics, Gloria Morgan's circle gossips about romances and scandals. The young Gloria, moving between these worlds, must learn to code switch, adopting different personae for different audiences. She attends elite schools, later the Greenvale School and Wheeler School, and begins sketching in notebooks, encouraged by Gertrude's circle of artists. Contemporary school records and yearbooks show a quiet, observant student who excels in art and languages, but struggles with mathematics. Teachers note her politeness, her careful adherence to rules, her reluctance to draw attention. In photographs, she appears in perfectly cut coats, gloves smooth against her wrists, the posture of a child already trained to meet a lens. Each portrait is both record and instruction. This is how a Vanderbilt girl looks, how she occupies space. The Greenvale School, located on Long Island, caters to children of wealthy families, offering small classes, extensive grounds, and emphasis on both academics and character formation. Gloria's report cards, preserved in school archives, show consistent effort and good deportment alongside her artistic talent. One teacher's comment notes, Gloria shows exceptional sensitivity in her drawing work, but remains reserved in group settings. The observation captures her pattern, expression through art, restraint in social interaction. The photographs themselves become part of her education. Professional photographers document her birthdays, school events, and summer travels. Images that appear in society columns and glossy magazines. She learns early to hold still for the camera, to arrange her face in pleasant neutrality, to present what is expected rather than what is felt. This training in being looked at will prove both valuable and constraining in decades to come. Contemporary child psychology was beginning to question the effects of such early public exposure, but wealth and fame override such concerns. The dual households create dual education in femininity. At Old Westbury, she learns American competence, purposeful activity, intellectual curiosity, artistic discipline. On the Riviera, she learns European performance, charm, fashion, the strategic deployment of beauty. Both skill sets will prove useful. Both carry costs. The American model demands constant productivity. The European model reduces women to decorative objects. Neither fully satisfies the growing desire for authentic self-expression. In private writings years later, Gloria will describe a lifelong sense of loss present from the beginning, as if separation were stitched into her inheritance. The grandeur of her surroundings taught security. The custody trial had already taught how quickly homes could vanish. The architecture of privilege has done its work. She understands beauty, and she understands that belonging can be revoked. When war and Hollywood beckon, she will carry both lessons and her training in performance onto a new kind of stage. By the late 1930s, the world that produced the original Vanderbilt mansions was already fragmenting. Fortunes built on railroads and shipping, Cornelius Vanderbilt's empire, have been thinned by mismanagement, taxes, and the Depression. Family chroniclers speak openly of wealth gambled away by Gloria's father, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, before his death in 1925. Reginald, known for his love of horses and gambling, reportedly dissipated much of his inheritance through reckless spending and poor investments, leaving Gloria's trust fund as the primary legacy. The Vanderbilt fortune, once estimated at over $200 million in the late 19th century, has been divided and subdivided across generations, with each heir receiving less than their predecessors. Contemporary financial analysts note that the family failed to adapt to changing economic conditions. Railroad wealth declined as automobiles and airlines gained prominence. Real estate holdings were sold to cover expenses, and the costs of maintaining multiple estates consumed capital faster than investments could generate returns. By Gloria's generation, the Vanderbilt name carries more prestige than actual wealth, though her trust fund still provides comfortable income. At the same time, transatlantic elites reinvent their daughters' education. Finishing schools, ballet lessons, and language tutors still aim to prepare young women for marriage. But mass media and modern psychology introduce new pressures. Cameras extend the reach of reputations, and psychiatrists begin to replace chaperones as guardians of inner life. Gloria's childhood, meticulously recorded in trial transcripts and newsreels, becomes an early case study in what it means to grow up as both person and brand. The cultural shift is documented in popular magazines and etiquette guides of the period, where earlier generations relied on private social networks and family connections. The 1930s introduced mass-market celebrity culture. Radio broadcasts bring distant voices into living rooms. Motion pictures create new models of beauty and behavior. Illustrated magazines like Life and Look circulate images of society figures to millions of readers. For young women of Gloria's class, this means navigating both traditional expectations and new forms of public scrutiny. In December 1941, at 17, Gloria traveled west and married Hollywood agent Pasquale Pat DiCicco at the Old Mission in Santa Barbara, California. Press photos show a slim young bride in satin, gloved hands clasped around a bouquet. The Associated Press caption emphasizes her age and inheritance. The wedding itself, though relatively small by society standards, attracts significant media attention. DiCicco, a Hollywood figure connected to actors and studio executives, represents a world far removed from Old Westbury's refined isolation. The Santa Barbara Mission, formerly known as Mission Santa Barbara, provides a romantic setting: Spanish colonial architecture, gardens fragrant with citrus and roses, bells that echo across the coastal valley. The ceremony is Catholic, requiring Gloria's conversion or special dispensation, adding another layer of transformation to the marriage. Guest lists preserved in society columns show a mix of Hollywood figures and East Coast society, an uneasy combination that foreshadows the marriage's difficulties. DiCicco's background raises questions that family members apparently ignore or dismiss. Born in Connecticut to Italian immigrant parents, he has worked as a talent agent representing stars like Errol Flynn and Jean Harlow. But rumors also connect him to organized crime figures, particularly New York mobster Lucky Luciano. Some sources describe him as Luciano's cousin. Others suggest looser connections. Whatever the truth, DiCicco moves in dangerous circles, his charm masking volatility and violence. Within a few years, she will describe this first marriage as a brutal education. In interviews decades later, she recounts DiCicco calling her Fatsy Roo, banging her head against the wall, leaving her with black eyes, details corroborated in biographies and television profiles. The training in obedience she received as a girl collides with new lessons about power and violence. Contemporary understanding of domestic abuse was limited. Wives were expected to maintain appearances, and divorce carried social stigma, particularly for someone in Gloria's position. The abuse follows patterns documented in later psychological studies: isolation from support networks, verbal degradation that precedes physical violence, cycles of rage and apology that create confusion and dependency. Gloria, raised to please, trained to avoid conflict, and lacking models for resistance, initially attempts to adapt. She modifies her behavior, apologizes for imagined failures, tries to anticipate and prevent his anger. These strategies, common among abuse survivors, only deepen her entrapment. At a dressing table in a rented Beverly Hills house, she writes letters home on monogram paper, careful to phrase things lightly. Short lines, "It's different here," conceal bruises that will only later be named. In the etiquette she has learned, marital failure reflects badly on the wife. The code of discretion that governs her class makes disclosure nearly impossible. To admit abuse would be to admit failure, to invite judgment, to suggest she chose poorly. Years later, she will reflect on this silence as one of the costs of her education in feminine grace. The Hollywood context intensifies the isolation. Far from Old Westbury's protective environment surrounded by DeCicco's associates rather than her own friends, she lacks resources for escape. The film industry's culture in the 1940s normalizes male violence and female subordination. Studio publicists routinely suppress stories of domestic abuse to protect stars' images. Gloria's fame makes her situation both more visible and more difficult to address. Any scandal would become national news. Refinement, she begins to see, can also be a silence that protects the wrong person. Her second marriage will offer cultural capital in children and another syllabus in what a name can and cannot guarantee. By April 1945, newly divorced, Gloria married conductor Leopold Stokowski in New York, stepping into a world of orchestras, European tours, and older world manners. Nearly 42 years her senior, Stokowski brings with him a different kind of prestige, the high culture of Carnegie Hall rather than the flash of Hollywood. Society pages print photographs of the couple at premieres. Captions frequently mention his genius and her fortune in the same breath. Stokowski, born in London in 1882, had already enjoyed a legendary career conducting the Philadelphia Orchestra and pioneering early recordings and film work, including his appearance in Disney's Fantasia. His cultural capital, connections to Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, and other major composers, offers Gloria entry into artistic circles that value intellectual achievement over social pedigree. The marriage represents both escape from Hollywood violence and continuation of her pattern of seeking education through proximity to accomplished men. The age difference, while raising eyebrows in some quarters, fits patterns common among wealthy women of the era. Marriage to older men of achievement who can provide mentorship, social position, and cultural access. Stokowski, having been married twice before, understands the dynamics of high-profile unions and the management of public image. His previous wives included Olga Samaroff, a concert pianist, and Evangeline Johnson, an heiress, preparing him for partnership with another prominent woman. In letters and later memoirs, Gloria recalls learning music at his side, sitting in darkened rehearsal halls, listening for the way a single wrong note could change the entire structure of a symphony. Her own education expands: language tutors, acting classes, and the first serious art lessons at the Art Students League of New York, where she studies drawing, anatomy, and painting. The Art Students League, founded in 1875, had trained generations of American artists, including Georgia O'Keeffe and Jackson Pollock. Gloria's enrollment there signaled serious artistic ambition beyond the amateur watercolors expected of society women. The League's teaching methods emphasized direct observation, anatomical precision, and rigorous technical training. Gloria studies life drawing from nude models, learning to see form and structure beneath surface appearance. She works in various media: charcoal, oil, pastels, developing technical versatility. Instructors treat her as a serious student rather than a society dilettante, demanding the same discipline and critique they offer all students. This democratic environment, where talent matters more than pedigree, provides relief from the constant awareness of her name. The marriage produced two sons, Stanislaus in 1950 and Christopher in 1952. Contemporary photographs show Gloria as a young mother, carefully dressed, her children posed in formal clothing for the camera. She navigates the demands of Stokowski's career: concert tours, recording sessions, social obligations in musical circles, while pursuing her own artistic development. Friends from this period, interviewed years later, describe her as quiet, observant, always sketching or making notes. The domestic arrangements reflect Stokowski's requirements. The household centers on his schedule: rehearsals, performances, and recordings that demand absolute quiet. Gloria manages servants, coordinates travel, hosts dinners for musicians and patrons, all while caring for young children. The pattern recalls her childhood observation of how wealthy households operate. One person's genius or ambition requires the coordinated labor of many others. At night, after concerts, she sits at a small desk, writing notes on thick stationery, thank yous to hosts, observations about color and sound. The ritual of the handwritten note, once a requirement of her class, becomes a tool for shaping her own sensibility. She fills notebooks with drawings, fragments of poems, observations about light and composition. These private documents, some preserved in archives, reveal a woman working to articulate an interior life separate from her public roles. The notebooks themselves vary. Some are elegant bound volumes with heavy paper, others cheap spiral notebooks purchased at drugstores. The mix suggests urgency. She writes and draws whenever inspiration strikes, using whatever materials are available. The entries combine visual and verbal, a sketch of a concert hall's architecture beside notes about the acoustics, a watercolor wash suggesting evening light with a few words about memory and loss. The girl who once served as evidence is learning to become an observer as she steps onto the stage herself, in front of cameras and on canvas. The performance of being Gloria Vanderbilt becomes both vocation and constraint. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, even before her first marriage ended, Gloria was appearing in Harper's Bazaar, photographed by Louise Dahl Wolfe and other leading photographers. A famous 1941 image shows her at 17 in a Howard Greer dress, the photograph circulating as a kind of visual textbook on American debutante glamour. The image, widely reproduced, establishes her as an icon of youthful beauty and wealth, her face becoming synonymous with a particular vision of American aristocracy. Louise Dahl Wolfe, one of the most influential fashion photographers of the mid-20th century, specialized in color photography and natural settings that revolutionized fashion imagery. Her photographs of Gloria emphasize youth, freshness, and an American quality distinct from European auteur. The lighting is soft, the compositions balanced, the overall effect suggesting accessible elegance rather than forbidding perfection. These images help establish Gloria as a public figure independent of her family drama, though they also cement her role as visual object. Fashion photography in this era serves multiple purposes. It sells clothes and cosmetics, but it also constructs ideals of femininity and class. Gloria's participation in these images is both performance and product. She learns to move for the camera, to hold expressions, to embody fantasies of elegance and privilege. Photographers later recall her professionalism, her ability to understand what an image requires, her willingness to hold uncomfortable poses until the light is perfect. The technical aspects of modeling prove demanding. Poses that appear effortless require physical strength and endurance. Holding an arm extended, maintaining a slight smile while lights heat the studio, wearing heavy fabrics in summer or light silks in winter for seasonal magazine schedules. Gloria develops professional discipline, arriving punctually, following directions precisely, maintaining energy through long shoots. This training in bodily control extends lessons learned in deportment classes and dance instruction. In the 1950s, she studied acting with Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse and appeared on Broadway in The Swan, 1954, expanding her repertoire of gestures and voices. Meisner's technique, emphasizing authentic emotional response and present moment awareness, offers a counterpoint to the polished performance she has practiced since childhood. Fellow students from the Neighborhood Playhouse, interviewed later, remember her as serious, hardworking, and surprisingly willing to abandon the composed surface she presented publicly. The Meisner technique requires actors to respond truthfully to imaginary circumstances, to listen deeply to scene partners, to access genuine emotion rather than indicating or faking feeling. For Gloria, trained since childhood to suppress authentic response in favor of appropriate performance, this proves both liberating and terrifying. Exercises that demand emotional vulnerability, shouting, crying, expressing anger, challenge every lesson her upbringing taught about feminine restraint and public composure. Her appearance in The Swan, a romantic drama set in a European court, receives mixed reviews. Critics note her beauty and poise, but question her dramatic range. The New York Times review, while polite, suggests she is more decorative than dynamic. Other critics are harsher, implying that her casting owes more to publicity value than talent. The experience, however, deepens her understanding of performance as craft rather than simply duty. She learns to analyze character, to work with other actors, to separate private emotion from public presentation. This training will prove valuable not only in occasional film and television appearances, but in navigating the constant performance her name requires. The distinction between performing and being, between public presentation and private experience, becomes a central preoccupation. In interviews from this period, she speaks about acting as a form of discovery. On stage, you learn what you're capable of feeling. You find parts of yourself you didn't know existed. The comment suggests both the appeal and the danger of performance. It can reveal authentic self, but also fragment identity across multiple roles. Each performance is bracketed by the same micro rituals: adjusting gloves in the wings, signing programs, writing brief thank you notes to directors. In an interview, she will later say that being photographed taught me things about myself that I didn't know and was trying to find out. The camera becomes a mirror, revealing and constructing identity simultaneously. The curriculum of grace has shifted mediums, from parlor to stage, from salon to studio, but the core remains: to move, speak, and even grieve in ways that are legible to an audience. She is learning that visibility is its own discipline, that training will prove invaluable and punishing when she puts not just her face, but her signature into commerce. In 1952, Gloria mounted her first solo exhibition of paintings at the Bertha Schaefer Gallery in Manhattan. Catalogs and museum archives record the show as the moment she is first presented simply as Gloria Vanderbilt artist. Her work, oils, pastels, later collages, often combines domestic interiors, dreamlike figures, and rich textiles, echoing both the comfort and claustrophobia of her upbringing. The Bertha Schaefer Gallery, located on East 57th Street, specialized in contemporary American art and design, exhibiting modernist painters, sculptors, and craftspeople. Schaefer herself was a respected curator, known for championing American artists and for her rigorous standards. For Gloria to show there, rather than at a society venue, signals her desire for serious critical engagement rather than social validation. Reviews are respectful but measured. Critics acknowledge her technical skill and distinctive visual language while noting her lack of formal training and the inevitable questions about whether her name opens doors that talent alone might not. The exhibition includes approximately 20 works: oils on canvas, watercolors on heavy paper, and early collage experiments. Prices range from $200 to $800, modest by contemporary standards, but positioned as serious art rather than society curiosities. Sales records show that roughly half the works sold, a respectable debut but not a sensation. Buyers include some established collectors, but mostly friends and social acquaintances, suggesting the gallery's social networks still matter despite attempts at professional legitimacy. Critics and curators note her persistent use of letters and bits of handwriting in collages, as if the act of writing were part of the image itself. One piece, Memory, will eventually be reproduced as a United Nations postage stamp, carrying her visual language into the bureaucratic machinery of global communication. Her collages often incorporate fragments of actual correspondence, torn envelopes, portions of signatures, canceled stamps, creating layered compositions that blur boundaries between private communication and public art. The technical process of collage proves particularly suited to her sensibility. She collects materials: antique papers, fabric scraps, pressed flowers, old letters, arranging and rearranging them on canvas until composition satisfies. The process is meditative, allowing for revision and recombination impossible in painting. It also permits incorporation of found objects with personal history, making artworks that function as visual autobiography, coded memoirs legible to herself, even if opaque to viewers. The work itself reveals preoccupations that will persist throughout her career: enclosed spaces, solitary figures, the tension between surface beauty and underlying melancholy. She paints interiors filled with patterned textiles and ornate furniture, but the rooms often feel airless, the figures trapped in elegant confinement. Art historians later note connections to symbolist painting and surrealism, though Gloria herself rarely discusses theoretical influences, preferring to describe her work as instinctive, emotional, personal. One painting from the 1952 exhibition, Interior with Mirror, shows a woman's reflection in an ornate frame, surrounded by flowers and fabric. The woman's face is indistinct, almost dissolving into the decorative elements. Critics interpret this as commentary on identity consumed by domestic space, though Gloria resists such readings. "I paint what I feel," she tells an interviewer. "If people find meaning, that's their privilege. I can't explain." In her studio, light falls across jars of brushes and bowls of water, the scratch of pencil on board replacing the rustle of silk. Here, at least, she controls the frame. Yet, even this space is shaped by patronage, critics, and dealers. Gallery owners suggest the subject matter, collectors express preferences, reviewers judge and categorize. The studio offers freedom, but absolute autonomy remains elusive. The studio itself, located in her Manhattan apartment, is a converted bedroom. North-facing windows for consistent light, walls hung with works in progress, shelves of supplies organized with characteristic precision. She works methodically, morning hours dedicated to painting when energy is highest, afternoons to correspondence and business. The discipline recalls childhood lessons but applied to self-directed purpose rather than imposed obligation. Art becomes a quiet counter-education, a place where the heiress can study who she might be when no one is watching, and then decide which parts to show. When she marries a writer from Mississippi in 1963, this private laboratory of identity will collide with the demands of public family life. On 24 December 1963, Gloria married Wyatt Emery Cooper in New York. A Southerner, writer, and critic, Cooper brings different expectations, less interest in titles, more in stories. In his 1975 memoir, Families, he writes, "It is in the family that we learn almost all we ever know of loving," a line that would later serve as a kind of thesis for their household. Wyatt Cooper, born in 1927 in Quitman, Mississippi, had worked as an actor, screenwriter, and journalist before meeting Gloria. His memoir, published shortly before his death, reveals a man preoccupied with questions of belonging, identity, and the meaning of home, themes that resonate with Gloria's own experience of dislocation and loss. Unlike her previous husbands, Cooper comes from modest circumstances, his perspective shaped by Southern small-town life rather than European sophistication or Hollywood glamour. His childhood in rural Mississippi during the Depression provides experiences radically different from Gloria's privileged upbringing. He describes a world of economic hardship, close family bonds, religious faith, and racial segregation that he would later critique. His mother, Wyatt describes with deep affection, taught him the importance of stories, memory, and maintaining human dignity despite poverty. These values inform his approach to marriage and fatherhood. The marriage ceremony, held at her apartment rather than in a church or hotel, reflects their desire for privacy and intimacy. Only close friends attend. Truman Capote serves as witness, his presence linking Gloria to literary circles that will become increasingly important to her social world. Photographs from the small reception show the couple relaxed, laughing, surrounded by friends rather than society figures or press photographers. Together, they create a home on the Upper East Side that journalists describe as exuberantly decorated. Patterned fabrics, saturated walls, Gloria's paintings everywhere. The apartment, photographed extensively for Shelter magazines, reflects Gloria's emerging signature style. Bold color combinations, eclectic furniture, mixing periods and styles, visual abundance, bordering on maximalism. Design critics note the influence of her artistic training, her confidence with pattern and color, her willingness to trust intuition over conventional good taste. Each room tells a different story. The living room combines Victorian furniture with contemporary art, oriental rugs layered over wall-to-wall carpet, collections of objects, porcelain, glass, carved wood, displayed on every surface. The effect is overwhelming but intentional, creating environments that feel inhabited, personal, almost womb-like in their enclosure. Critics label the style romantic maximalism, and it will influence interior design for decades. Their sons Carter, born January 1965, and Anderson, born June 1967, grow up amid cameras and bedtime stories, a fusion of old-world manners and new media exposure. Anderson will later recall his mother arriving at school in a purple beaver skin coat, mortifying him and delighting photographers. The children's upbringing blends contradictions. They attend elite private schools, but are encouraged to pursue creative interests. They learn proper table manners, but also encounter their mother's bohemian artist friends. They grow up with wealth, but witness their father's commitment to writing and intellectual work. Wyatt's parenting philosophy emphasizes emotional honesty, creative expression, and intellectual curiosity over social status or material acquisition. He reads to the boys nightly, discusses serious topics at meals, encourages their questions and opinions. Gloria, despite her own complicated childhood, proves a devoted mother, though her parenting carries marks of her upbringing: emphasis on appearance, concern for propriety, awareness of public perception. At the dining table, Gloria insists on handwritten thank you notes and proper introductions, but she also encourages creative work: drawing, acting, curiosity. The old etiquette of the calling card is repurposed as emotional literacy. She saves their childhood drawings, records their observations, and creates what Anderson will later describe as an archive of family life. Wyatt's memoir writing, his emphasis on storytelling and emotional honesty, provides a framework for this documentation. Family dinners become storytelling sessions. Wyatt recounts his Mississippi childhood. Gloria describes Old Westbury and the custody trial. The boys contribute school adventures and imaginative fantasies. The conversation blends fact and fiction, memory and invention, creating shared narratives that bind them together. Wyatt records some of these exchanges in notebooks, material that will later inform his memoir. In this second family, she briefly believes she has rewritten the script inherited from 1934. The next act will show how fragile even the most carefully designed household can be when illness, success, and money converge. On the 5th of January 1978, Wyatt Cooper died in Manhattan during open-heart surgery after a heart attack the previous December. Newspaper obituaries describe him as a writer and husband of Gloria Vanderbilt, a reversal of the hierarchy that had once defined her. At 43, she is a widow with 2 teenage sons, her image already entwined with the fashion and media industries. The death occurs suddenly despite Cooper's apparent good health. He had suffered a heart attack in late 1977 and underwent surgery in early January 1978, with Gloria and their sons expecting recovery. Instead, complications during the operation proved fatal. Contemporary news coverage emphasizes the tragedy: a man in his 50s, 2 young sons left fatherless, a widow whose previous losses are cataloged for readers as if grief accumulates like debt. The medical details, later disclosed in interviews, suggest surgical error or complications that might have been prevented with different decisions. Gloria will wrestle for years with questions about whether different doctors, different hospitals, different timing might have changed outcomes. These what-ifs, common among survivors of sudden loss, compound her grief with guilt and frustration at medical systems she couldn't control or fully understand. In the months that follow, she manages grief under scrutiny. She continues to work, to give interviews, to pose for photographs. Anderson will later say that his father's book Families became his guide for how the man would have wanted him to live, while his mother's resilience showed him how loss could be carried. Friends from this period describe her functioning on autopilot, maintaining schedules, meeting obligations, presenting the composed surface that has been her armor since childhood. The pressure to maintain appearances proves exhausting. Society expects widows to grieve decorously, but not excessively, to honor the dead while continuing to function, to be simultaneously vulnerable and strong. Gloria navigates these contradictory demands with practice skill, but privately she struggles. Sleep becomes difficult. Appetite disappears. Concentration falters. She increases sessions with her therapist, seeking tools to manage overwhelming emotion while continuing to function publicly. At her desk, Gloria writes condolence replies, pages of blue ink in a looping hand. The ritual of the thank you note becomes an act of survival, a way to process the avalanche of sympathy while keeping the terror of sudden aloneness at bay. Hundreds of letters arrive. She responds to each personally, the mechanical act of writing providing structure when interior life threatens to collapse. Years later, she will describe this correspondence as crucial to her survival, the discipline of gratitude forcing attention outward when grief threatened to consume. The content of these letters varies. To close friends, she acknowledges devastation and fear. To acquaintances, she maintains polite restraint. To Wyatt's family in Mississippi, she expresses commitment to honoring his memory through raising their sons. Each letter requires calibration of tone, selection of appropriate disclosure, management of her own emotion, and the recipient's expectations. The work is exhausting but necessary, a way of maintaining connection when isolation threatens. She also returns to painting with new intensity, producing darker, more abstract work. Gallery records show increased productivity in 1978 and 1979, as if the studio offers refuge that social spaces cannot provide. The paintings from this period often feature solitary figures, empty rooms, and muted colors, a visual language of loss that she cannot speak aloud. One series, never exhibited publicly, shows variations on empty chairs, the absent body suggested by shadow and negative space. Art provides an outlet for emotions that words cannot express. She paints late at night, unable to sleep, working until exhaustion forces rest. Friends who visit describe canvases covering every wall of her studio, a visual diary of grief more honest than anything she can say in interviews or social situations. Some of these works will later be donated to museums. Others remain in private storage, too raw for public display. Love, she is discovering, does not immunize against the randomness of loss. It merely deepens the ledger. Into this vulnerability steps an opportunity to make her name, literally, pay the bills. In 1976, Indian-born designer Mohan Murjani proposed a line of women's jeans with Gloria Vanderbilt embroidered in script on the back pocket, accompanied by a swan logo. The idea, denim cut for women's bodies, marketed with a socialite's face, proves revolutionary. In its first year, the line reportedly did $70 million in wholesale business, swelling toward $200 million and more by the early 1980s. The timing proves crucial. The denim market in the mid-1970s was dominated by workwear brands like Levi's and Lee, with limited options designed specifically for women's bodies. Murjani recognizes that baby boomers raised on casual dress now want jeans that fit better and signal status. Gloria's name and image, aristocratic yet accessible, refined yet modern, provide exactly the branding needed to elevate denim from utilitarian to fashionable. The product development process involves careful attention to fit, fabric, and details. Gloria participates actively, testing samples, suggesting modifications, insisting on quality. The jeans feature a higher waist and more tailored fit than men's jeans, addressing complaints women have voiced for years. The fabric is slightly softer, the stitching more refined, the pockets positioned to flatter rather than merely function. These seemingly small adjustments create products women actually want to wear. Advertising photographs show Gloria leaning against a studio wall in dark jeans and a silk blouse, signing her name in chalk. The cursive she once practiced on ivory note cards now becomes a brand stitched by the millions. The advertisements, shot by leading fashion photographers, blend accessibility with aspiration. Gloria appears approachable, friendly, but still elegant and sophisticated. The tagline, variations on "the jeans that fit," emphasizes product quality alongside celebrity endorsement. She licenses her name for scarves, perfumes, bedsheets, shoes. Corporate documents list GV Limited, founded in 1976, as a vehicle for expanding the empire. The licensing deals proliferate. Gloria Vanderbilt fragrance, Gloria Vanderbilt home collection, Gloria Vanderbilt eyewear, even luggage and accessories. Each license requires negotiation, approval of designs, monitoring of quality. The business grows beyond her capacity to oversee directly, necessitating managers, lawyers, and accountants. The business success transforms her financial situation. After decades of living on trust fund income and the modest earnings from art sales and occasional acting work, she now commands substantial revenue. She purchases properties, invests in art, supports her son's education, and achieves financial independence that the earlier generations of Vanderbilt women never knew. The irony is not lost on her. The name that once meant passive inheritance now generates active income through her own efforts and image. The money provides security, but also creates new vulnerabilities. Wealth attracts advisors, some genuine and competent, others self-serving. Gloria, trained in art and etiquette but not finance, must trust others to manage increasingly complex business structures. She signs documents she doesn't fully understand, delegates authority to professionals whose credentials she cannot evaluate, and gradually loses control of systems that bear her name. At home, the soundscape shifts. Fax machines, phones, board meetings. Yet even as she signs contracts, she continues to write personal notes in ink, tiny human gestures alongside the industrial reproduction of her signature. Business associates describe her as surprisingly hands-on, reviewing designs, attending photo shoots, insisting on quality control. She understands that her name is the product, and protecting its associations requires constant vigilance. Department stores create Gloria Vanderbilt sections, mini boutiques within larger spaces. Point-of-sale displays feature her signature and swan logo, creating brand consistency across products. Sales figures track consumer preferences. Denim products remain strongest, but home goods also perform well. Market research suggests buyers value the combination of quality and accessible luxury the name represents. The same act that once affirmed identity now disperses it, making Gloria Vanderbilt a commodity available in every department store. When the numbers on those contracts turn against her, she will learn that a name can be sold more easily than it can be protected. By the late 1980s, the business that once promised security had become a maze of legal documents and tax notices. Gloria has granted power of attorney to her lawyer Thomas Andrews and psychiatrist Dr. Christ Zoes. By her account, they mismanage and siphon funds, selling business interests and failing to pay taxes. The financial complexity of her empire, multiple licensing agreements, international contracts, residual payments, creates opportunities for those with access to exploit her trust. The power of attorney documents signed years earlier when the arrangement seemed prudent give Andrews and Zoe's broad authority over her financial affairs. They can sign contracts, sell assets, make investments, and authorize payments without requiring her approval for each transaction. This delegation, common for wealthy individuals with complex holdings, assumes that advisors will act in their client's best interest. When they don't, the victim often discovers the damage only after years of accumulation. In 1993, she sued them, alleging that millions had been stolen. Court records show that Andrews dies before the case concludes. The judgment awards her roughly $1.79 million, money she will never recover. The New York City Bar Association later grants her $300,000 from its Victims of Fraud Fund. Meanwhile, the Internal Revenue Service files a lien of $2.5 million for unpaid taxes on returns from 1979, 1980, 1982, and 1992, forcing her to sell the Southampton estate and a 5-story Manhattan townhouse. The tax situation proves particularly complex. Andrews and Zoes allegedly failed to file accurate returns or pay taxes owed, creating liabilities that compound with penalties and interest. Gloria's signature appears on many of the returns, but she will claim in testimony that she signed without reading, trusting her advisor's assurances that everything was proper. The IRS, focused on collection rather than culpability, pursues her for payment regardless of whether the original fault lies with her advisors. The sales are emotionally devastating. The Southampton house, purchased during the height of her jeans success, represents security and achievement. Located in a prestigious area, the property features extensive gardens she designed, studios where she painted, rooms filled with collections assembled over decades. Photographs from this period show elegant interiors being emptied, furniture tagged for auction, rooms stripped to bare walls. She describes watching movers pack her possessions as a second displacement, echoing the losses of 1934. The Manhattan townhouse holds even deeper memories. She and Wyatt renovated it together. The boys grew up there. Every room contains traces of family life now ended. The forced sale feels like erasing that history, packaging memories for strangers. She salvages what she can: personal papers, Carter's childhood artwork, photographs, but furniture, decorative objects, and much of the physical environment of those years must go. In interviews, and in The Rainbow Comes and Goes, she will later warn, "Remember, whenever money is involved, it brings out horrific things in people. It has the power not only to split families apart, but to destroy the foundations of one's life." The betrayal by trusted advisors, men she relied on to manage complexity she had neither training nor inclination to understand, reinforces lessons learned in childhood about the precariousness of security and the vulnerability created by wealth. The legal proceedings drag on for years, consuming time, money, and emotional energy. Depositions require her to revisit financial decisions, explain trust in advisors, account for expenditures spanning decades. The process is humiliating, exposing private financial details to public scrutiny, forcing her to admit she did not understand arrangements she had signed. Lawyers characterize her as naive, careless, insufficiently vigilant, characterizations that sting because they contain elements of truth. Public reaction varies. Some sympathize with her victimization. Others suggest wealthy people deserve less sympathy. Still others use the case as a cautionary tale about trusting advisors. Media coverage tends toward sensationalism, emphasizing the dollar amounts involved and the dramatic fall from prosperity. Few outlets examine the systemic vulnerabilities that enable such fraud or the gendered dynamics that made her particularly susceptible. The poor little rich girl has become a woman in late middle age, sitting through yet another trial, once again watching others argue over what she is worth. The financial ruin is devastating, but the loss that follows in 1988 will prove deeper than any balance sheet. On 22nd July 1988, in her 14th floor penthouse on the Upper East Side of New York City, Gloria watches her 23-year-old son Carter Vanderbilt Cooper climb onto the balcony wall and, after a long, harrowing pause, fall to his death. News reports describe a model boy and Princeton graduate. Later interviews and her book A Mother's Story will frame the suicide as a psychotic break, possibly linked to medication. The day itself is reconstructed from Gloria's testimony, police reports, and Anderson's later accounts. Carter, who had been experiencing mental health difficulties, became agitated in the afternoon. Gloria tried to calm him, talking to him as he sat on the balcony wall. She described his eyes as unfocused, his speech incoherent, his behavior suggesting he was not fully present. When she attempted to pull him back, he jumped. The fall from the 14th floor was fatal. The preceding weeks had shown warning signs. Carter exhibited mood instability, paranoid thoughts, and behavior his family found alarming, but didn't fully understand. He had been seeing psychiatrists, trying different medications, but no treatment seemed to stabilize him. Gloria, herself long in therapy, believed professional help would solve the problem. She could not have known that some medications, particularly in young adults, can paradoxically increase suicide risk. The immediate aftermath is chaotic. Emergency responders, police, media gathering on the street below. Gloria is questioned about what happened, her account recorded in official reports. Anderson called immediately, rushes home to find crowds, cameras, his brother dead, his mother in shock. The scene, another Vanderbilt tragedy playing out in public, recalls the custody trial, the pattern of private grief becoming public spectacle. In a 2011 conversation with Anderson on his talk show, Gloria says, "You never get over it, but you learn to live with it." In the HBO documentary Nothing Left Unsaid, she reflects, I thought the worst thing that had ever happened to me was when I was 9, but that wasn't the worst. The worst is to lose a child. The comparison is telling. Both events involved the loss of control, public exposure of private tragedy, and questions about responsibility. But where the custody trial left her merely displaced, Carter's death leaves a void that no court ruling, no passage of time can resolve. The guilt proves nearly unbearable. She replays the final moments obsessively. Should she have grabbed him differently? Called for help sooner? Recognized the danger earlier? These questions, unanswerable and torturous, occupy her thoughts constantly. Therapists help her understand that she could not have prevented what happened, but emotional knowledge lags behind intellectual understanding. Self-blame becomes another form of keeping Carter present. In the years after, she continues her rituals, arranging flowers in painted vases, writing letters, this time to friends who knew Carter, urging them to share stories. More, 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 she tells one interviewer, because that brings him alive. She creates shrines in her apartment, photographs, Carter's childhood drawings, objects he loved. Anderson describes visiting and finding his brother's room preserved, his mother unable to change anything, as if maintaining physical space might prevent complete disappearance. The grief manifests physically: insomnia, weight loss, chronic anxiety. She increases therapy sessions, tries support groups for bereaved parents, seeks any tool that might ease the pain. Some days she functions normally, other days she cannot get out of bed. The unpredictability of grief, its sudden, overwhelming surges, proves difficult to manage alongside public expectations that she appear composed and resilient. Media coverage, while generally sympathetic, still invades her privacy. Photographers stake out her building. Tabloids run speculation about family dysfunction. Strangers offer unsolicited opinions about parenting and mental health. The public nature of the loss makes private grieving nearly impossible. Even condolence letters, while well-meaning, require response and engagement when withdrawal feels necessary. Therapy, grief counseling, and Anderson's presence help her survive, but she will later admit that part of her remained on that balcony, watching helplessly. The pen still moves. The price of having lived and loved is now written in a different ink. Out of this devastation, a quieter, written conversation with her surviving son will become her last sustained act of authorship. In the 2010s, as she enters her 90s, Gloria turns increasingly to the page. The art books The World of Gloria Vanderbilt and memoirs like It Seemed Important at the Time revisit her past loves and houses, while the HBO documentary Nothing Left Unsaid, premiered 9 of April 2016, and the book The Rainbow Comes and Goes, published 5 April 2016, frame her life as an extended conversation with Anderson. The collaboration with Anderson creates a new form of legacy. Rather than producing a conventional autobiography, they exchange letters, handwritten, then transcribed, about love, loss, family, and memory. Anderson asks questions she has never been asked. She answers with unusual candor, perhaps because the interlocutor is her son, perhaps because age has loosened earlier constraints. The book becomes a bestseller, introducing her story to generations who know her only as Anderson Cooper's mother, reversing the earlier dynamic when he was known only as her son. The letters themselves vary in tone and content. Some address specific events, marriages, career, decisions, the custody trial. Others explore abstract themes: the nature of love, the persistence of loss, the relationship between memory and identity. Anderson's questions are probing but gentle, seeking understanding rather than confrontation. Gloria's responses reveal vulnerability she rarely showed publicly, acknowledging mistakes, expressing regrets, but also affirming choices and resilience. In that correspondence, she offers distilled lessons. Death is the price you paid for being born. Some of us are born with a sense of loss. It pervades us throughout our lives. We are not put on this earth to see through one another. We are put on this earth to see one another through. The woman who once learned to write thank you notes as an obligation now uses the same act, pen on paper, name at the bottom, to redefine what her inheritance means. These aphorisms, circulated widely after publication, become part of her legacy. They suggest a philosophy earned through experience rather than adopted from books. The emphasis on loss as fundamental rather than exceptional reflects her particular history, but it resonates with readers who recognize their own griefs. The call to see one another through, rather than see through, articulates an ethics of compassion over judgment, presence over analysis. The documentary shows her in extreme old age, still elegant, surrounded by her paintings and collections, speaking directly to camera with the composure learned in childhood, but now deployed in service of truth-telling rather than concealment. She discusses her marriages with surprising frankness, acknowledging mistakes and painful lessons. She talks about money with clarity, warning about the dangers of trusting others with financial power. Most movingly, she speaks about Carter, allowing herself to be filmed crying, to be seen grieving, to admit that some losses cannot be overcome. The decision to participate in the documentary reflects changed attitudes about privacy and public disclosure. Where earlier generations maintained discretion about family matters, Gloria's generation and younger embrace transparency as authenticity. The documentary medium itself, with its apparent immediacy and intimacy, encourages revelation. Anderson's role as both son and journalist creates a unique dynamic. His professional skill draws out compelling material, but his personal connection ensures boundaries and protection. Viewers respond powerfully to her vulnerability. Reviews praise her honesty, her willingness to acknowledge pain without seeking pity, her eloquence about loss. Some critics note that the documentary, while moving, also serves commercial purposes, promoting her book, maintaining public interest, shaping her legacy. But most accept that these purposes need not contradict genuine emotional disclosure. Anderson, in turn, will later note that she died with far less money than the public assumed, leaving him about $1.5 million, a modest sum. Relative to the original Vanderbilt fortune, but a powerful archive of letters, art, and filmed conversations, the material legacy is small. The emotional and artistic legacy is substantial. Her final education is mutual, a mother and son learning, in writing, how to tell the truth about a life lived under scrutiny. The inheritance includes not just money but boxes of correspondence, notebooks filled with sketches and observations, paintings and collages documenting decades of creative work, photographs spanning nearly a century. Anderson preserves these materials, understanding their historical value and personal significance. The archive becomes source material for understanding not just one woman's life, but the transformation of American society, celebrity, and women's possibilities across the 20th century. What remains, after lawsuits, sales, and obituaries, is something smaller and more durable than a mansion: handwriting on paper, preserved like a fragile textile. In the spring of 2019, a photographer from the New York Times visited Gloria Vanderbilt's apartment one last time. The published image shows her seated on a sofa surrounded by paintings. On the table before her lies a neat stack of correspondence, envelopes addressed in the same looping hand she practiced as a child. The apartment itself reflects a lifetime of collecting and creating, walls dense with art, surfaces covered with objects, every corner saturated with color and memory. She wears simple dark clothing, her hands folded in her lap, her expression peaceful. The photograph captures accumulated layers of time. Behind her hang paintings from different periods of her career: early oils from the 1950s, collages from the 1970s, recent watercolors. The furniture mixes periods and styles: Victorian chairs alongside contemporary pieces, antique tables covered with modern ceramics. Books are stacked on every surface, spines showing titles about art, literature, psychology, history. The abundance suggests a life spent accumulating beauty and knowledge, filling space against emptiness. The scene answers the opening portrait and quietly revises it. The refined ritual of writing, once a requirement of class, then a tool of romance and business, has become, in old age, an archive of survival. Letters to sons, to friends, to herself. The fortunes have risen and fallen. The houses have been bought and sold. The name embroidered on millions of pockets now appears most powerfully in ink on a single line. She died on 17 June 2019 at 95 from stomach cancer. Obituaries appear worldwide, cataloging her marriages, her business success, her artistic work, her famous son. They struggle to summarize a life that spanned from Gilded Age nursery to Internet age, from custody trial to television interview, from society beauty to businesswoman to grieving mother. The headlines echo those from 1934, Poor Little Rich Girl, updated to Poor Little Rich Girl Dies, as if the formula established in childhood could contain the entirety of experience. The New York Times obituary runs over 2,000 words, unusual length reflecting her cultural significance. It quotes friends, colleagues, and family members, reproduces photographs from different life stages, attempts to balance achievement and tragedy, privilege and loss. The Washington Post emphasizes her business acumen. Vogue focuses on her style influence. Art publications note her painting career. Each outlet selects different aspects to emphasize, revealing how multifaceted her public persona had become. Anderson's eulogy, portions of which are made public, emphasizes her resilience, creativity, and capacity for love despite repeated losses. He describes her as someone who didn't believe in regret and who faced forward even when looking back. He quotes her favorite maxims, shares private memories, thanks her for teaching him to value relationships over possessions. The tribute is moving, but also carefully composed, offering the public what is appropriate while withholding what remains private. The funeral is private, attended only by close friends and family. No photographers are admitted, no press releases provide details. This final privacy, after a lifetime lived publicly, seems both fitting and ironic. Even in death, the negotiation between public persona and private self continues, managed by those who loved her and understand the costs of exposure. No narrator explains what it all means. The light on the paper, the slight tremor in her hand, the crowded walls around her invite the viewer to consider a final question she herself once posed. How much of a life is chosen, and how much is the price you pay for being born into a story already in progress? The photograph, like the calling cards and thank you notes and signatures that preceded it, records a moment of composed performance. But now the performance is stripped to essence. An old woman, surrounded by what she made, holding steady until the very end. The image remains available online, reproduced in articles about her life and work. People study it, looking for clues about aging, survival, creativity in late life. Some see triumph over adversity. Others see the toll of public exposure. Still others see simply an old woman in her home. All interpretations carry truth. None exhausts meaning. What endures is not the fortune or the houses, but the work. Paintings in museum collections, letters in archives, filmed conversations preserved digitally, the example of a life lived with intention despite circumstances largely beyond her control. The inheritance she left Anderson includes not just money, but this archive of resilience, this demonstration that identity can be shaped even when it cannot be chosen, that grace can be authentic even when it is performed.